2 true scary stories you should listen to before bed. The Ritual House. Unlocking a century-old family curse. The rain slammed against the windows of my apartment like a fistful of struggles throwing punches, an endless parade of fists against the behind-the-glass sheets, its continuous code echoing my own heartbeat on the verge of explosion. My desk was littered with 3 empty coffee cups, remnants of my 4th consecutive sleepless night. A cursor blinked on my laptop screen, taunting me, a digital metronome keeping track of each second of my writer's block. Deadlines hovered above my head like storm clouds, yet inspiration continued to prove as elusive as sleep. My gaze wandered to the second monitor, a true crime documentary. Pause. The face on the screen belonged to Micho Yatani, a woman whose chief disappearance had captivated the nation 6 months earlier. Her story was more than another tragic headline. It was personal. We had the same unusual name, Miko, a coincidence that sent a chill down my spine. The case appeared simple. Micho went missing after a dispute with her husband, Botan. 3 weeks later, police found her body wrapped in an antique Persian rug, buried in the garden of her mother-in-law's Victorian house at 532 Holloway Lane. The investigation uncovered a chilling collusion between Botan and his mother, Emmy, and both were convicted, their confessions clean and neat, wrapped in a tidy little package. But there was something off about the story, as if a painting had been hung at an angle. The email came in at 2 a.m. my time. No subject line, only a sender named M. My cursor floated over it as thunder quaked my windows. Inside was a single sentence: "The truth is not buried where they think it is." Beneath the cryptic dispatch was an attachment: "Last night, move," and an address I instantly recognized: 532 Holloway Lane. My throat tightened. The house where they discovered her corpse had remained derelict since the trial, allowed to decay under the burden of its sordid past. In the video's lower left corner appeared the time: 2:33 a.m., 30 minutes from now. Every true crime documentary and horror movie I had ever seen screamed that I needed to delete the email. But the writer in me, hungry for inspiration and haunted by coincidence, had plans for that. Before I could talk myself out of it, I snatched up my keys, rain jacket, and flashlight. The drive to Holloway Lane was like stepping into a different world. Streetlights got fewer, shadows darker. The Victorian house loomed out of the gloom like a decayed tooth, its windows black and accusatory. Graffiti sullied its once elegant facade, and ivy crept up its walls like grasping fingers. My headlights picked up movement in an upstairs window, or maybe it was the rain fooling us with the light. I killed the engine, and silence settled like a burial shroud. I stepped out onto the porch, with each board creaking beneath me, attachment, and protesting my flux. The front door was not locked, it stood ajar, as if inviting me in. Inside, the air was heavy with rot and something else: anticipation. The beam from my flashlight sliced through the dark, exposing wallpaper that was peeling off the walls and people who would never have the luxury of ever getting to read a story like mine. The floor was a minefield of junk, broken glass, moldy newspapers, and what appeared to be claw marks raking the wooden boards. An old television set rested on a wobbly stand in the living room. As I drew near, static erupted from its speakers, startling me. The screen sprang to life, even while the power cord lay cut on the floor. The static faded to footage I recognized from the documentary. Micho Yatani in her kitchen, laughing as she cooked dinner, but this was a different version. The camera panned to show Emi Yatani in the background, observing her daughter-in-law with unmasked hatred. The timestamp said March 6, 2018, the day Micho went missing. The footage stuttered, trembled. Now Micho was looking into the camera, her face struck with fear. "She's not what you think," she said, whispering. Hours or days of darkness. The ritual, the screen turned black. My flashlight died at the same time, and I was in total darkness. The air grew arctic cold. When I finally got the light to work again, something else awaited. A leather-bound journal on a dust-coated armchair. The initials EY were stamped on the cover, Emi Yatani's innermost thoughts, bound in leather and secrets. As I opened it, my hands shaking, I felt a rush of stale air on my face, the breath of secrets only now coming into the light. The original entries were commonplace shopping lists, appointments, family recipes. Then the mood turned sharply. Emi's words became frenzied, filled with allusions to ancient rites and dark powers. She described Miko as if she were some inhuman entities, a menace in need of extermination. One side note caught the eye. March 6, 2018. The binding is finished. The vessel is in her body, but her spirit is not in her body. The ritual calls for another offering, another Micho. The names are not a coincidence. They are chosen. Ice flooded my veins. The floorboards creaked behind me. I turned slowly, the flashlight beam shaking. In the doorway was a figure, a woman in a white dress, long dark hair concealing her face. She stuttered like a bad signal, her shape translucent, yet somehow more concrete than anything else in the room. "You've come," she said, her voice like static on a broken radio. "I knew you would. We have more than a name in common." The ghost of Micho Yatani lifted her head, and the face was the same as mine. My flashlight began exploding, showering me in sparks. I ran, as though my heart might explode from my chest. The house vibrated around me, doors banging, windows rattling, Emi's laughter ricocheting from every corner. I reached my car, but the journal somehow remained on the passenger seat. It was open to a new page, new ink forming the words. "The ritual isn't over. 2 Michos, 2 vessels, 1 destiny." That night, sleep was completely out of the question. I read up on Emi Yatani's backstory and found a detail I had missed. Every generation of her family featured a suspicious death, always a young woman, always tied to an ancient ritual she believed would allow someone to achieve immortality. The following morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Check the basement of the old house. Not where they left her body, where they did the ritual." The original Yatani family home remained on the edge of town. I was gearing up to look closer when I noticed something reflected in my phone screen behind me, Micho's ghost. Her face an echo of mine now, her mouth poised to speak words I never heard. But I didn't have to listen to them. I knew what she was saying. The truth was not buried in Emi's garden. It was waiting in the basement of a house that had seen generations of sacrifice, where 2 women named Micho would finally discover the dark heart of a family curse. And something told me I wasn't going to have long to figure it out. The ancestral home of the Yatani family crouched at the end of a long, unpaved road like a malevolent toad. Different from the Victorian near Holloway Lane, this house was Japanese, a vestige of the family's roots. Its paper screens and swooping roof appeared to absorb rather than reflect the morning light. I parked behind a wall of wild-growing bushes, Emmy's journal weighing down my bag. My research had turned up a centuries-long pattern. The Yatani women weren't just killers, they were adherents to something older, darker. Every generation would sacrifice a girl, called Micho, thinking doing so would prolong their lives. The names were no coincidence. They were selected, predestined from the cradle, like me. The front door was marked with protection symbols, not the Shinto designs I'd always pictured, but something older and cruder. They had been carved deep into the wood and then painted over and over again, as though somebody wanted to hide them but also to keep their power. Inside, the air was thick with incense and antiquity. The walls were lined with family photos, generations of Yatanis, each with the same grim look. But it was the spaces between photos that intrigued me. Spaces where photos had been taken away, leaving darker rectangles on the faded wallpaper, missing faces of Micho's sacrifice. It required 3 keys to open the basement door, keys I had skimmed off of the false bottom of Emmy's journal. The stairs led down into a darkness so total it felt tangible. Each step down was like descending deeper into cold water. The beam of my new flashlight showed me a room that had been set up for something awful. The concrete floor was marked with circles of salt and iron filings. Candles rested at regular intervals, black wax like tar. The symbols, which were on the front door too, were etched onto the walls, but in something resembling dried blood, and it was disturbing to say the least. In the room's center rose a dark wood altar with a stained and scored top. Chains fastened to the floor around it told their own horror story. "You're beginning to see, aren't you?" I spun around. Micho's ghost stood at the foot of the stairs, more solid than I'd seen her. In the dimness of the basement, she seemed almost alive. "Emmy didn't kill me because I married her son," she said. "She murdered me because she had marked me, just like the others, just like you." "Why us?" My voice shook. "Why the name Micho? It's not just a name. It's a beacon. It lures us toward them, decade after decade, but something went awry in my sacrifice. It had not been done right. And that's still why I'm here, and why you were attracted to my story." A door slammed upstairs. Footsteps creaked overhead. "She is here," said the ghost of Micho. "Emmy. They released her 3 days ago. Good behavior." The basement door burst open. Emmy Yatani stood at the top of the stairs, worn but still potent. There was a fanatical light in her eyes. "2 Michos," she said with a smile. "The old gods are generous, after all. A do-over for doing the ritual correctly." She began descending the stairs, something glimmering in her hand. The Micho's ghost behind me flickered like a candle in wind. "Run," she whispered, "or stay and fight. But whatever you do, do not allow her to complete what she started." I had seconds to decide. The journal in my satchel contained the truth of this ritual and perhaps, just perhaps, a way to finally put it to an end. Emmy reached the bottom step, and I made my choice. To be continued. Subscribe for Chapter 3, where ancient rituals are juxtaposed against modern vengeance, and the true meaning of the name Micho is finally unveiled. Certain doors, once opened, are eternally ajar, though they may be destroyed. As she stepped down the last stair, Emmy's blade caught the flashlight beam. It was an ancient knife, its blade of old bronze, marked with the same symbols that covered the walls. My back against the altar, the wood cold against my jacket. You don't know how much of an honor this is, Emmy said, her voice heavy with the burden of generations. Every 100 years, the old gods claim their tribute. 2 michos, 2 vessels, 1 transmogrification. You inspire my immortality, your death, like it did for your grandma? I asked, Emmy's journal smoldering in my bag like a loaded gun. I found her final entry. The ritual failed in 1924. It always fails. Emmy's smile faltered. You've been reading? What is not your business? Your ancestor servant in Japan was the first micho, I said, walking around the altar to keep it between us. For a century, you've been trying to recreate her sacrifice, and you're always missing something. And that's why you're still human, still aging, still desperate. The spirit of Micho appeared next to me, her shape more solid in this ritual space. Tell her about the marks, she whispered. I yanked the journal out, and it opened to a series of hand-drawn symbols. Those are not protective symbols, I said. They're binding runes. But you have been drawing them incorrectly. Your family's been doing the ritual backward for 100 years. Emmy shot over the altar, blade slicing the air where I'd been moments before. I recoiled, dropping my flashlight. It rolled across the floor and through wild shadows that made the blood symbols on the walls seem to dance. Lies, Emmy snarled. My grandmother taught me the true way. The marked ones must die so we can live. Your grandmother lied, Micho's ghost said, her voice carrying new strength. She couldn't admit her mistake. Each generation, you kill us. But the power slips away because you don't understand. We're not your sacrifices, we're your judges. The temperature in the basement plummeted. The black candles around the room burst into flame, but their light was cold, revealing shadows that shouldn't exist, and they weren't alone. More figures stepped out of the darkness, women in clothing from different eras, all bearing the same face. The previous Michos, generations of them, their spirits trapped by imperfect rituals and unfinished business. Impossible, Emmy whispered, her knife hand trembling. I opened the journal to its final pages, where my research had revealed the truth. The name Micho doesn't mark us as victims, I said. It marks us as vessels of justice. Your ancestor didn't kill her servant. The servant stopped her from unleashing something terrible. Every Miko since then has been drawn to your family to prevent the ritual from being completed. The ghost Michos moved closer, their forms growing more solid with each step. Emmy backed toward the stairs, but the spirits had already closed the circle. No, she said. I won't let a century of preparation be ruined. The old gods promised. The old gods lied, I cut in. Or maybe you just heard what you wanted to hear, but this ends tonight. I began to recite the true ritual knot, the one Emmy's family had passed down, but the original text I'd found hidden in the journal's binding. The words felt ancient on my tongue, carrying power that made the air buzz with electricity. Emmy rushed at me, blade raised, but the ghost of her Micho caught her arm. Their touch caused Emmy to cry out as frost spread across her skin. The other spirits joined hands, forming a circle around us. Each spoke a piece of the ritual in their own voice, their own language, but the meaning rang clear. This was no sacrifice, it was a sealing, a closing of doors that should never have been opened. Emmy screamed as the ritual reached its peak. The symbols on the walls began to burn, not with fire, but with a cold light that consumed the darkness. The altar cracked down the middle, decades of spilled blood turning to ash. You can't, Emmy gasped. My grandmother, her mother, all of them. They were wrong, I said, and now they'll have to answer for it. The floor beneath Emmy began to sink, forming a void that pulled at her like quicksand. The spirits of the Mishos drew closer, their combined power creating a vortex of supernatural energy. The ritual isn't about gaining immortality, I told her. It's about maintaining balance. Your family tried to cheat death, but death cannot be cheated forever. Emmy clawed at the ground as the void pulled her deeper. Please, she begged. I can change. I can make it right. The ghost of her Misho knelt beside her. Some things can't be made right, she said. They can only be ended. With a final scream, Emmy vanished into the void. The symbols on the walls flared once more, then crumbled to dust. The spirits of the previous Michos began to fade, their purpose finally fulfilled. The ghost of Emmy's Micho turned to me, her form already growing transparent. Thank you, she said, for finishing what we started. What happens now? I asked. Now we rest. The cycle is broken. There will be no more marked ones, no more vessels, no more sacrifices. The name Micho can just be a name again. She smiled, and for a moment I saw the person she had been in life, young, vibrant, full of promise. Then she was gone, along with the other spirits, leaving me alone in a basement that felt lighter somehow, as if a century of darkness had finally been cleansed. I climbed the stairs on shaking legs, Emmy's journal tucked under my arm. The sun was rising, its light streaming through the house's windows, casting out the last shadows of the Yatani family's dark legacy. My writer's block was definitely cured. I had a story to tell. But as I drove home, I couldn't help but check my rear-view mirror, watching for ghostly figures that no longer had reason to appear. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But their stories deserve to be told, if only to prevent them from being opened again.
Hit subscribe button for more spine-tingling stories. Like and share with your friends who love a good scare. Leave a comment below with your favorite scary story theme.
This story is dedicated to all the Mishos who came before, and to those who helped put old ghosts to rest. Sometimes the truest horror lies not in what haunts us, but in what we're willing to do to escape death's natural law.
I've been a yoga instructor for most of my adult life. Over the years, my practice has taken me to breathtaking place cliffside retreats in Santorini, secluded beaches in Bali, serene forests in Japan. Each location had its own energy, its own rhythm, but nothing could have prepared me for the ominous beauty of Koh Samui. When I first moved in, I thought it would be like any other to check off another location in my repertoire, to find myself in the sunrise and sunset, in the sunlight, in the earth, to touch the rock, to breathe. But Koh Samui was different, and now I understand why. The first hint that something was amiss arrived via the news. A 24-year-old Russian actress named Kamila Belyatskaya was missing, her name published on Russian media websites. She was practicing yoga on a rocky outcrop at dawn, swept away by an inexplicable surge of water. The locals referred to it as a tragedy. The authorities ruled it an accident. But as I skimmed the headlines, one odd detail wouldn't leave me. The waters had been calm that day. Still, I went. I told myself it was coincidence, nothing more than a freak accident. I told myself it wouldn't happen to me. My rental bungalow was a stone's throw from the beach. On my first night there, I fell asleep to the rhythmic crash of waves. But just before dawn, I awakened to a sound that did not belong, the low, resonant hum of something. Alive. It wasn't robotic, and it wasn't organic. It was something in between, vibrating through my bones like a chant from some long-forgotten temple. But when I walked onto the beach that morning, the world seemed muted. The sky was a leaden slate, the gray that sucks up all color. There were no birds, no boats. The very waves even stooped low, their crest folding gently onto the sand. I moved my mat to the rocks where Camilla had last been sighted. They extended over the water like a ship's prow, jagged but welcoming. As I ascended, I saw the offering's fragrant flowers, flickering candles, bowls of fruit. They had been put there recently by someone. The air thickened as I started my practice. 20 minutes into the drive, the temperatures plummeted. The mist that had shrouded the shoreside began to come in, curling around the rocks like fingers searching for something or someone. And then the humming came back. It appeared to originate from the rock underneath me, pulsing under my palms as I knelt in downward dog. It rose, blending with the waves until the two sounds were inseparable. I opened my eyes. She was there. At first, I assumed she was real, a young woman standing knee-deep in the surf, her long white dress puffing running off the surface of the water. She went through a progression of poses with an elegance that was practically ethereal. But as I squinted through the mist, I saw her form was translucent. I could see the sea through her body, lapping like a mirage. I gasped as she pivoted to face me. Above all, her face was beautiful, heartbreakingly so. But her eyes were deep voids, darker than the blackest ocean trench. They weren't human. They weren't even alive. She thrust out one hand, gesturing out to sea. I looked where she pointed, and there they were. Dozens of bodies drifted below them in the water, their features beckoning from the glow. Men, women, even children, all held suspended in perfect meditative poses, their faces blissful as the currents lulled them. Some wore modern clothing, others wore clothes from decades, even centuries ago. Among them was Camilla, hair as golden as seaweed drifting, lips turned up in a peaceful smile. I stumbled backward, almost slipping on the wet rock. The humming grew louder, pouring into my ears, my head, my chest. Then a voice, gentle, sing-song, impossibly clear. Join us. I didn't wait. I picked up my mat and rushed down the rocks, the offerings crunching underfoot. I wiped myself off, but the mist, thick and choking, held on until I had returned to the sand. Only then did I dare glance back. She was gone. In the days that followed, I tried to explain what I'd seen. Hallucination, exhaustion, some cruel trick of the mind, but the locals knew better. When I inquired about the rock, they looked away, mumbling about the five spirits of the sea. They said the rock was sacred, a portal between worlds. Those who, they said, disrespected it often did so at the cost of their lives. I tried to leave, but was held back, morbid curiosity, a need to understand. I gathered fragments of folklore, researching through hours in the island's libraries and temples. The Phi Thale, I found out, were not simply guardians. They were collectors. They collected the souls of those who sought enlightenment too close to their sphere, granting eternal peace beneath the waves. I stopped practicing yoga at all, too terrified of those quieter moments when my breath might fall into synchronicity with the hum of the ocean. But the island had more in store for me. On my final night in Koh Samui, I woke to an aggrieved sound. The humming. Now it was louder, echoing through the walls of my bungalow. And then faintly, I heard her voice. Come back. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed up my things and walked away, leaving the mat there that had been my companion through years of practice. Yet here, thousands of miles away, I'm not free. Sometimes in the dead of night, I wake to find my body moving as if of its own accord, folding into a warrior pose, my arms stretching eastward, across the land, into the sea. And always, I hear the hum. Koh Samui, if you're ever on there, be warned, Don't climb those rocks. Do not do this on that damned platform, and if you hear the humming and it sounds beautiful, then run. Because the sea is unforgiving, and the spirits that inhabit it, they never let go. The ocean's hidden horror. What really happened to Russian actresses Marina Polina